Hi, welcome to the video. Today I'm going to talk about bar chords, specifically some of the most common movable shapes. Now, the most important part about this is I'm going to try and make it easier for you. I'm going to try and give you advice that hopefully causes you to be able to do these without as much of a struggle. Bar chords aren't easy, but I'll make it as easy as I can for you. So, what is a bar chord? It's basically just a chord where barring refers to covering more than one note with a single finger. Now these are all movable shapes, so that means I can take a fingering like this D major and I can move it to any fret and the fingering won't change. What will change is it will still be a major chord, but the root or the name of it will change. So D, D sharp, E, F, etc. So movable shapes allow you to play a single shape and play all 12 notes from that, rather than going C, G, D, and having to change your fingering for every new chord. You just move it to a new fret. Okay, so let's jump into this. The shapes I'm going to be teaching will be a major and minor one off the 6th string, major and minor off the 5th string, and a major and minor off the 4th string. But before we get into those, the first thing I'd say is let's go ahead and try two different ways to play a power chord. So if you haven't played both these, I'd recommend doing this first. I'm going to play a fingering with the 1st, 3rd, and 4th finger. Doesn't matter if you play off the 5th string or 6th string. This is important to get down because these other chords use that inside it. So if you already play that, you've already got 3 of the strings for the bar shape. The other power chord fingering I'll do is barring the 3rd finger across 2 strings. So it's 1st, 3rd, 3rd. And all this will be in chord boxes, which I'll show at the end, and you can download on my Patreon page free. You don't have to be a member, and the link is in the description of this video. So this will help you with one of the shapes also, which just requires you to bar one more note. So before we jump into the 6th string shapes or 5th string, let's do the 4th string ones, because that might be a little bit easier, and they're actually pieces of this bigger shape. If you notice, like this F chord, they've probably played back here. If you move it up here, it's the A chord, because this is my root. That's the top octave of this A shape that covers 6 strings. If I do the A minor, that's the top part of this A minor. So if you notice this, if I play a power chord, and I can play this top part, I'm playing the entire chord just in 2 different pieces. So we'll try this first, then we'll go to the bigger shapes. So this is a shape that you've probably seen if you ever heard the song Stairway to Heaven. That's how it starts out, is with this shape. So basically it's a minor chord. I'm going to be barring this 1st finger across. Now before we get too much into these shapes, if you're struggling with them, I'm going to put them all at the 5th fret, because that's just kind of a central place in the middle of the neck. But the frets get smaller as you go higher. So if it's easier for you to play it up at the 7th or 8th fret where the frets are smaller, that's perfectly okay. Go ahead and move it up there, then gradually move it back. I wouldn't go much higher than that, because it starts putting an awkward position on your wrist unless you really position it so it's not. So I wouldn't go all the way up into these areas. Okay, another thing to think about if you're struggling with these, they do take more strength and endurance. You might want to look at the guitar you're using. I've had a lot of people, beginning students, who have really cheap guitars. They come in, they're doing the technique perfectly right, but they still don't get a good sound off it, because the height on the strings are really high on it, or the action on it, which makes it harder to hold the strings down. So if you have the distance between your string and your fretboard is very high, you might want to either take the guitar in and see if you can get Guitar Tech to lower it, or if it's a very inexpensive guitar and you don't think it's worth the money to spend that on it, you might want to think about upgrading to another guitar. It's not that you can't play with high action, but it's going to make it harder. You have to use more strength and more endurance to play them. Another thing to think about is if you're using thick strings, that's also going to make it harder, because you have to apply more pressure on. So I'd recommend, if you're using electric guitar, go to like a light gauge, which like a 9 gauge on the 1st string, which would be this. If you look at the package, and usually that's good enough. You can go even lighter, but that's kind of why I prefer is like a 9. I wouldn't go any heavier than that. On acoustic, I would go to extra light, which would be a 10 gauge. And so if you notice the numbers, the extra light acoustic is actually heavier than the light electric. So if you, especially if you're playing acoustic, you don't want like a medium set of strings or something. It's just going to require way more strength for a beginner or intermediate players just learning this stuff. It's not that later on you can't do that, but it'd be like if you're running a mile and it's the first time you're running and you're going to put a weight vest on. The first time you're running, don't use a weight vest. Once you're good at it, you can add extra resistance like that. But do it in the easiest possible way to start off with. Okay, so let's go and jump into this again. So basically what I want is to get the pressure on this, I want my thumb pretty much right behind the finger that's barring in this case. So it's kind of in this type of position, so I can pinch it in there. I don't want to be doing something like this. I'm not going to get as much leverage on this bar, so have it right there. I don't want it up here because if I do that, my finger naturally bends. I want to keep my finger straight, and when I go up, you can kind of see if I have it here, my finger just naturally, especially if I'm doing a 6-string bar, starts bending, making it harder to do the bar. So have it in the middle or lower on the neck on it for your thumb, and have it right behind the bar in this case. So this first one, we're barring across 3 strings. I want it right up and next to the metal fret on there, and I want my finger relatively straight. On this one, because I have to reach forward a fair amount, it's okay if it cocks backward a little bit and goes a little bit diagonal, and that's okay, as long as I'm still getting clean notes. That way I can reach forward a little easier. You can also do it without doing that. I'm just saying it's not a big deal either way. If I keep this completely straight, angle a little this way or angle a little this way, as long as I reach this note cleanly, that's fine. I don't want it also to have a string falling in one of the grooves necessarily. So on this one, I'm pretty much going from this joint forward. And always on these, you can strum it, but make sure you test it by going each note individually, because you might be muffling a note and not realize it. If that 3rd string is not ringing out, it's probably the 3rd finger touching it. So make sure you're on the tip of the finger, which means you might have to bring your wrist forward a little bit more to get that on the tip. If you pull it back too much, it starts flattening out this finger, which you don't want in this case because it's in front and will muffle the strings behind it. So this is that A minor chord. To make the major, it's just that F shape. So I'm only changing one note. I move this down to only cover 2 because you never want to bar more notes than you need to. In this case, I'm only going to hear the 2 because this one goes on the 3rd string now. So both these need to be on the tip, and this is what's kind of tricky on that F shape. In this case, I'm playing in A position. Is these need to be on the tips while this needs to be flat. So it's that, again, kind of contradiction between the two. And it doesn't matter how you strum it or pluck it, just make sure each note is ringing cleanly. So get these 2 down, the major and the minor. And then let's go and move to the next ones. So now let's move to A minor. So this is just that 3-note power chord with a bar across. Now on this, again, I want to keep this finger on. When it's going across 6 strings, it's more important than that previous A minor that it's straight. So I want to tuck my fingers just so you can see my finger. I want that straight. Now it's okay too if you're having trouble reaching on this. You don't have to be flat on this finger. I actually prefer it not to be. I roll it to a side a little bit. So I'm actually using this edge of my finger rather than the flat of my finger to bar it. And that's perfectly okay. That just allows me to get a little bit more leverage on this. And my hand position in general on this large bar like this is, if you notice, my wrist is primarily centered behind these fingers. And then I'm reaching back with this finger. So I'm reaching back rather than the other way and trying to put my wrist behind the first finger and reach forward. That doesn't make it really work well. I want to swing my elbow towards my body and reach back with this finger and then get on the tips of these. Otherwise it's going to be hard to get on the tips of those. And same thing. Make sure every note rings cleanly. Always check that because you might not notice some of them not ringing when you have 6 notes ringing at the same time. Okay, so this here, now the root is on the 6th string, so it's an A minor. All I need to do is add the 2nd finger here. Now if you notice, these shapes that I'm doing right now are coming from the open position. Almost any open chord can be made into a movable chord, either by simplifying a little bit or just covering up the open notes with a finger. So this is coming from this E minor shape. All I need to do to make it a bar is, it's kind of a stretch to reach this finger back to where it's going to need to be when I move it forward. So I'm going to switch to these two fingers, and then when I move forward, see, I've got that position. I've got the shape we're playing right now. So same thing, if you forget how to finger it, think of your E major. That's what we're going to do next, refinger it. So I free up my first finger, and then I can move it forward, and there's my movable bar shape of that E major and E minor. So now I'm doing this. Only one note changed. It becomes major when I go from the flat third of the minor to the major third. And again, all the notes, I'm on the tips of these three, flat on here, thumb like before, right behind this. It doesn't have to be like this. It can be a little bit more here. It can stick out a little bit. But I want the basic pressure being pretty close to being behind it. Okay, so same thing. Nice clean sound. You've got the chord. Again, if you need to move higher, that's fine, do so. Let's go and move down. Now, to do the next chord, all we're going to do is take this whole shape and move everything down one string, because it's going from this E major to this A minor. So this is the A minor, just moved up the neck. We're also going to do the A major, moved up the neck. Doesn't matter how you finger it in open position, but we're going to bar it as we move it up. So now the root is here on the 5th string. So this is a D minor. Now, if you don't know the notes on the neck, I will leave up in the corner link to, I did a video on memorizing the notes on the neck. I actually did 2 videos on that. So watch the first one on that, and that'll help you to get to know the notes, which will help you when you move around to know what chords you're playing. So this is a D minor. Same shape as the top one, so nothing really different, but I'm only covering 5 strings. Again, don't cover extra string if you don't need to. If you find you have trouble accidentally hitting that one, then you can move your finger close enough that it touches that, but I'm still not going to bar it. I'm just going to touch it so it's muffled if you need to. But if you're accurate with your strumming, you can not touch it at all, and that's perfectly fine. So same thing. Okay, so there's your D minor. Now I'm going to go to D major. Now this one, if you notice, this finger suddenly got cockeyed from what it was before. The reason being, I'm not barring this finger. I'm just holding down this one note, and I want my bar to be flat. So this one's going to be straight along the middle fret. And then I'm just going to reach in and get the single note here. The other fingers I just try and relax and not tuck them or do anything like that. I don't want you tucking fingers when doing chords, because if then you have to change to one of the ones that needs that finger, it's going to slow you down significantly. So have it hovering somewhere out here so that when I need to, I can put it in. Okay, so now we're doing the D major. Now in this one, I'm not playing that first string. Back in this position, you maybe did play that first string, but that note's a repetition. It's the same note as this. Anytime you have a note more than once in a chord, you don't need to play both notes. So if somebody's really giving you a struggle, on the chord thing, the boxes, I wrote the names of all the notes. Any of the notes, if you notice, major and minor chords only have 3 different notes. Any of the ones that are a repetition, you don't actually have to play. You only have to play on that, like A minor up here, the A, C, and E. You don't have to play the A 3 times, E 2 times. It might give you a bigger sound, but you can simplify it down. So that's another thing to think of, is if you need to, simplify it. If you can't get a note to ring out, but it's already in the chord somewhere else, it's not actually necessary. I'm not saying don't try and still get it to ring out, but you don't need it. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to let my 3rd finger lightly touch that first string so it's muffled, but I need to keep enough pressure that my 2nd string is still ringing out. So it's basically, I apply pressure here, but I let my wrist come forward a little bit so that it doesn't touch that first string. So if I pull my wrist back too far, then I'm going to go ahead and play that first string, which I don't want, because it'll change the chord. So I'm bringing it forward a little bit. If you don't have the accuracy to skip the string, as long as it's muffled, it's okay. It's not going to change the sound significantly. There I strummed it, but with it muffled, it's not going to ring out, so it doesn't really matter. Okay, so that's your major. Now all of these can be moved anywhere on the deck. As long as you're not using open notes on it, the shape will not change. Now this will also lead you into a lot more complex chords, potentially. If you get these bass shapes down, like for example, if I can do this D minor and D major positions on here, I can just pick up the pinky and it becomes a D minor 7. I can pick up the second finger and it becomes a D sus 2. I can move the pinky down one, it becomes a D7. I can add this finger in to that, it becomes a D major 7. I can bar and then put this pinky here, it becomes a sus 4. So all these shapes have variations you can do. So once you get the basic major and minor down, it opens up a lot more possibilities. If you want me to go through those possibilities for all these shapes, I can do that in our video in more depth. But otherwise, leave a question if there's anything you're not sure about. But just go through the different tips. Thumb placement is very important. You know, making sure you're not muffling notes, getting that bar straight along that fret. Checking your guitar, being sure it's playable. Anyways, we'll leave it at that. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe too.